Guys, good to see you. Congrats on the book.
Thank you so much.
So I know that there's like a metric of like how people like, you go on Amazon or whatever and you read the stars. I have my own metric for how a book does, and it's how many dog ears, or is that what they call them still? So this is a good sign. Like, I don't actually count other ones, but like every time I was reading, and I don't like to read with a pen at night because, apparently I will mark things up in the bed. But like, this is a good sign, guys. I lot of dog ears, which means a lot of great news, a lot of great stories. That's a very positive. So that's like my Dave Portnoy pizza review version of books, number of dog ears. So I just want to start off with the question that I think jumped out at me and a lot of other people. And Amie, I'll start with you. It's sort of like that old, like, what did you know and when did you know it? There's a lot of folks that I think read something like this, and I thought I followed closely, right? And I knew some things, but I read a lot more that I didn't know. And I guess the big question on a lot of people's minds, especially with respect to Biden and his decline, is why is it take a book like this in April of 2025 to learn something that it sounds like people knew fairly openly a lot earlier?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you worked in the White House, Sean, and you know how these things go. I mean, for the most part, these stories don't get told until people leave office and there's no retribution. I think that a lot of these people that talked to us felt a little liberated and at liberty to do so. And that's why we're getting these stories told now. And, I think this book has so many revelations, and I think it's good for the Democratic Party to learn from its mistakes and kind of admit what happened, because I feel like there was a lot of delusion happening, and for Republicans also to see, the train wreck that was going on.
Jonathan, it's funny because, when Psaki was in office as press secretary and then Karine Jean-Pierre, I used to ask reporters, ask them a very simple question. When was the last time you spoke with the president? Okay. Because when I was press secretary, I don't think there was a day I didn't speak to President Trump less than 10 times. And if you're the press secretary and you're supposed to be getting information, having access to them. But one of the things that I thought was interesting, just to give you some perspective, on like day 4, 5, or 6, whatever it was, the deputy press secretary, TJ Ducklo, who is very, very close with the Biden family, was fired for how he treated another reporter. Okay. And when Psaki was asked, this was my tell. She said, when did the president learn of the firing and when or whatever? And she said, Ron Klain handled it. Now, to me, the takeaway of that is, here's a guy, TJ Ducklo, very close. He was the guy during COVID that hung out with them at their house. And it wasn't Biden who fired him. It was Ron Klain, the chief of staff. And it wasn't Biden who was informed. It was Klain who informed him. I would have gotten my butt chewed if I had fired someone of that nature and not informed the president. And that to me was an early tell that the president wasn't allowing key staff to get close to him.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue here, Sean, is that there was such a small cocoon around Biden in the first place. And it really grew out of that pandemic election, the 2020 election. Everybody talking about Biden hiding in his basement, and him being off the trail and not having to do, the sort of voter contact that you normally do as a presidential candidate, not doing all of the media that a presidential candidate usually does. And then it continued on into the White House. They kept their social distancing plan, and they kind of used that as an excuse to keep Biden walled off from, not just from all of America and not just from the media, but even from White House staff. I think you're absolutely right that the number of White House staff that came in contact with Biden regularly was small to start with. And over time, I think it got smaller and smaller. I know it got smaller and smaller to the point where it was really just a couple of his top aides who met with him regularly, and family members, and a couple of, sort of personal aides to him and to First Lady Jill Biden.
Amie, picking up on that point, you guys wrote, ultimately, a core group of family members and deeply loyal aides acted as gatekeepers, schedulers, and protectors of Biden. Now, I've said before, when people ask me who was running the White House, that there were obvious people that had a long-time relationship with Biden. Steve Ricchetti, Ron Klain, Mike Donnellan, Bruce Reed, Anita Dunn to some extent. Who do you guys think was influential that we don't know about? who kind of really was influential that we didn't hear about a lot?
That's a good question. I mean, we know Jill Biden. She's his most loyal aide and senior advisor. But I think all of them, I mean, when people ask me who's responsible for, for not being as honest or forthright about this, I think all of them share some responsibility. And that's why you're seeing a lot of Democrats kind of aim fire at them right now. And they're really upset about what went on over there.
There was a woman that you guys...
Oh, Sean, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I think it was mind-blowing, and we detail this in the book for the first time, the degree to which Joe Biden leaned on Hunter Biden as a political advisor. There's a quote from one of the people close to Biden who says he believes that Hunter is his best political advisor. And when I heard that, my mind was blown. I mean, Hunter Biden is not a great political advisor to start with. He has, and this is not to jump on Hunter Biden personally, but he has exercised extraordinarily poor judgment over and over and over again. And the idea that the president of the United States would turn to his son, I think is, potentially problematic, but B, more importantly, somebody who has so often exercised this terrible judgment as a political advisor is just, it's nuts. And it speaks to, I think, a level of paranoia around Biden, that he didn't trust people outside of his family to have his best interests in mind. And, what we see in this book and what was happening in the White House before that is you actually had people so loyal to Biden who thought they were so loyal to Biden, they refused to blow the whistle on a president who clearly had declining capacity. And we could see that on television. And I know that there are a lot of people who are angry at the media for collectively not doing more to report on this at the time. I would just say Amie and I are two of the reporters who actually dug for that, during the course of the presidency, but also, we're not doctors. So as the media, we can't diagnose him. And the people who bear the most responsibility for allowing Joe Biden to continue as he did were the people in the White House, his family members and the very top aides. And they chose to be loyal to him over, the potential damage to the country, because what we saw in that June debate should have troubled every American. That the leader of the free world, the guy with his finger on the nuclear button, was so bereft of coherent thought.
Yeah, I want to get to Hunter. You guys got a great anecdote about the debates and him pushing out Anita Dunn. I want to talk about that in a minute. But to your point, let me ask you something about your reporting. Mark Caputo, who's now at Axios, was very public a few weeks back where he said that when he was at Politico, he was discouraged entirely from writing about Hunter Biden and the Biden family and that kind of stuff. Amie, you're at The Hill. Jonathan, you're at NBC. Have either of you been discouraged, or were you discouraged from writing about this as you guys were digging into it from your news organizations?
No, I mean, encouraged, probably. I know that if I was sitting on something, my editor would get a little upset at me. But there was always, I know Jon did too, but we took multiple swings at this story. Even low-hanging fruit. I remember I did a story once about his exercise routine. Presidents normally run or golf or something, and no one could point to anything that he was doing. And this is something that, any White House would love to sort of telegraph. They couldn't. And that kind of said everything you needed to know.
And I know at NBC, we were constantly working on this. There was a group of us who were, looking at, what we, I guess euphemistically called the age question, but that included the question of physical and mental decline. And we pushed and pushed. And I know we at NBC broke some of the stories around that. For example, him using shorter stairs to go up the belly of Air Force One instead of the big, long stairway. And I know that's, there's so much that will, that comes out in this book about what was really going on behind the scenes. And we didn't even decide to do this book until mid-July. So right, after the debate, and most of the reporting was done after the election. So, if we had known these things at the time, we would have reported them at the time.
And just to show you also, Sean, I mean, we wrote another book before this book called Lucky, where Jon and I actually detail that the president his aides tried to keep him away from doing evening activities and evening speeches. And so, I mean, you can go back and look at our track record, but we were taking swings at this constantly.
Yeah. You know who I was fascinated as a character that came alive to me was Jen O'Malley Dillon, Biden's campaign manager. And I honestly would admit I knew who she was. I know that she's a very respected political operative. But let's just say one of the things that I learned in the book was that she might not be the best person to work for. John, do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, Sean. And, we've got lots of anecdotes around that. I think there's plenty of, we have an entire chapter. I don't know what language we're allowed to use on the Sean Spicer show, but we have a chapter that rhymes with puckery. About all the staff infighting and about Jen O'Malley Dillon. And look, I mean, there's, as you know, Sean, there's only a handful of people who have the experience and the managing skills to run a presidential level campaign. But there are other people that could have done that. And I know that there were a lot of people that left the Biden campaign this time and some people who worked on the Biden campaign last time who were really rubbed raw by the way that Jen dealt with her underlings.
Yeah. And especially, we'll get into this in a second, how when there was that merger with Kamala Harris's team. And again, I was just blown away. I don't want to get ahead of myself because there's some other things, but just how they tried to gel or didn't. But Amie, there was a scene in the book that you guys detail where Kevin McCarthy goes over to the White House and I'm like, the Biden's says, you want to take a tour, and he takes him into the dressing room of the pool house. And McCarthy says the president's not with it. And then to Jonathan's point about the language, says some other crazy stuff. Why didn't that, why didn't that get out? This is Kevin McCarthy, right? He should have wanted, were people not listening? Was this the first time that you got that story? What more do we need to know about that instance?
Yeah, it was the first time we were told this story. And you would think that the former House Speaker would put this out there. But no, for the first time, I think we reveal the fact that he thought these things, that he felt like an aide almost to the president, which is kind of humorous. And keep in mind, this is a tour that follows another error that Biden makes when he gets up and he tries asking where a dead congresswoman is. And this is her family that comes to the White House for a tour.
She wasn't there, was she?
She was not there, Sean. Maybe in spirit.
I read that, and then I like what you said. It goes from trying to figure out where a dead congresswoman is, right, to then saying, do you want to take a tour? And McCarthy's like just blown away that he's showing him the dressing room or the pool room. I've been there, by the way. It's not really something that I think would be tour worthy, but whatever. Jonathan, one of the things, John, that I thought was interesting is you guys talk about, for a lot of his aides, it was job security. Like they may not have been completely honest with him, although his lawyer, Bob Bauer, you guys write, tried to warn of the political and family risks. And you mentioned Hunter. And I think one of the things to me is that for a guy like Biden, Hunter has issues, right? And this might not be the smartest move to put the family and Hunter back in a situation like this. And yet Biden overlooked that. He overlooked his age. He overlooked his family issues. And in some ways, if you're a Democrat, I would argue that to some degree you can be mad at him and say that was a very selfish decision that you made, knowing all that was happening. Was Bob Bauer the only one who was at least alluding to these issues that he should maybe consider?
It was Bauer and Bob Bauer's wife, Anita Dunn, were really the only people that sort of raised issues with him to suggest that a campaign might not be the best thing for him and his family, and that a campaign would be difficult. But they didn't say don't do it. And Sean, you've worked in politics a long time, and the aide that tells the person who wants to run for president not to run for president is quickly not an aide to that candidate anymore. So you're right, a total job security situation. But you go from a place where Biden decides to run without having any real discussion about it with his aides. It's not like there was a big do we or don't we. It was Biden's like, I'm running. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. When are we going to announce it? And despite his age and despite the growing signs of infirmity, they go full speed ahead with this campaign. And it just, It boggles the mind that no one was really willing to sort of stand up and at the risk of their affiliation with Biden, say this is just a terrible idea, because it clearly was a terrible idea.
But Amie, it's more than a terrible idea. I was sitting there, and I mean, this is early in the book, page 37. You guys talk about the vice president's office had strategies around the possibility that Biden would die. Biden, I mean, that's not like, hey, what happens if he's out of town for a week? What do we do? What happens if this is like, hey, should we sit down and kind of war game? What happens if he dies?
Yeah, it's next level stuff, Sean. And, Jamal Simmons, who's a very well-respected Democratic strategist who became Kamala Harris's communications director, essentially carried around a spreadsheet of Republican judges because he felt like he needed to do that because Republicans, if something were to happen to Joe Biden, Republicans would sort of invalidate Kamala Harris. And this would give her a sense of validation to have a Republican judge swear her in. And this was a really big deal. I mean, in fact, he told people at the time to, in case anything happened, to contact him if it did happen, because he had a whole plan in place.
Yeah, but you guys write that it wasn't like he said, hey, guys, here's the deal. If Biden dies, I've got a plan. Call me. He basically, it was to me the way it read. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm like, he said, like, if something happens, like it was cryptic.
Yeah, it's a little cryptic. I mean, for sure. But I mean, he's got this spreadsheet. By the way, not just Republican judges, but Republican judges who were not appointed by Trump. So he's got in his mind this sort of JFK LBJ situation where the president dies and the vice president has to be sworn in quickly. And in his mind, it's imperative that be, as Amie said, somebody who would be seen as valid by Republicans. The other thing that we report, Sean, in this book for the first time, and I'm shocked not very many people have picked up on it in the book, but in the paragraphs right before that, we report that a very small group of DNC officials started plotting out what they would have to do if Biden died or got out of the race or was incapacitated at different points in the process. So if he died before the primary,
was that Donna and Minion?
We can't say which people were involved in that. We don't say in the book because the sources are on background there, but it was a very small number of very high-ranking Democratic officials who were like, if he dies in the middle of the primary, what do we do? If he dies after he wins the nomination, what do we do? And one of the people who worked on that said to us, like, this is just like what we had to do as a matter of course, dealing with a president, at Biden's advanced age. And, they didn't say infirmity, but that was clearly implied.
So, Amie, there's a lot of use of the word chaos when it comes to Donald Trump and his administration. But as I read this book, I'm like, okay, so the vice president's office is plotting what happens if the guy dies. Her staff is constantly, and she's not happy with her staff. They don't seem happy with her. And then Biden's staff doesn't like her. I mean, to me, it's like, I feel like the funny thing is they all put on this pretty show. Biden would say nice things about her. She would talk about Joe's working hard. Behind the scenes, it actually seemed like a brutal knife fight.
Oh, I mean, there's a reason we called this book Fight. That's one of them. But yeah, I mean, we detail in the book about how, letters are being sent from Joe Biden's senior set of advisors to donors. And they're essentially undermining Kamala Harris and saying, look, if you try to boot him from this race, you're going to be left with her. And Jon and I, we read these letters. These are emails sent, very direct emails, sent to donors. And donors were not happy about that, by the way, which is why they shared these missives with us.
Basically, Biden tried to save himself after the debate by drowning Kamala Harris.
So this debate, by the way, the one thing that I think I took away, at least in the book, is that the debate was critical, right? Everything to me came down to how if he hadn't done that debate early, it wouldn't have happened. Hunter Biden, as you point out, Jon, squeezes out when they go off to Camp David. He basically pushes everybody out. Anita Dunn, Zients, the chief of staff at the time, doesn't seem really engaged. It all comes down to the debate and the prep. I think you guys detail that the prep was basically a disaster. He's getting sick. He's not attentive. I mean, if that debate hadn't happened, would we have had an entirely different race for president?
Yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt. He still would have been the guy at the top of the ticket. And I think the outcome would have been the same. But yeah, it would have been. Yeah.
Not only would the outcome have been the same, I think President Trump wins by more if Biden stays on the ticket, and I think Republicans win even more seats in the House and Senate. I mean, just if you project forward and say things stay on the same course, eventually they probably debate in the fall. And at that point, it is way too late for the Democrats to like find a new candidate. I thought it was way too late for them to find a new candidate in June or July. I've been surprised by things in politics in my life, and that was certainly one of the. I mean, this was the wildest race for the White House we've ever seen. But if you project that out, I think President Trump beat Joe Biden, and then he beat Kamala Harris.
I agree with that. I think he would too. So the thing that I found interesting too is there's a big, like, Biden really has not just a chip on his shoulder, but grudges. So I think he's very much has some kind of issue with Obama and how he was treated. And then you guys write that basically he believes fundamentally that Pelosi stabbed him in the back. And there's this point where he's traveling down to Texas for the funeral of, I think it's Sheila Jackson Lee, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And he basically is saying Pelosi is at the top of my disloyal list. Right. So this is a guy who I think that my takeaway from this whole thing was that he really has a chip on his shoulder when it comes to how he's treated by Obama and how Pelosi stabbed him in the back.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, his relationship with Obama was complex before this election, and it got increasingly so throughout. But, and they needed to come together in the end and have a bit of a mending when stories were being written about how they hadn't talked. I think aides tried to put them together so they could say that they talked. But they're not on very good terms right now. I think Biden is still very angry at his former partner, and Pelosi even more so. The scene you just described, he's talking to Al Sharpton and Jim Clyburn and some loyalists on Air Force One, and he says, "I'll never forget how you guys supported me and you were there for me, but I will never ever forgive Nancy Pelosi." And we're told that that relationship is still very much frayed.
All right, let's talk about Kamala Harris. When there's a scene you guys lay out right after Biden steps down and he calls her and she wants him to endorse her and he's reticent. How does that play out? I mean, in terms of the relationship, he's telling her, I'm going to step down, but I'm not going to endorse you right out of the gate. And that seems to have created some serious tension for between the two of them.
I mean, this is an insane scene, Sean. Like, Biden finally decides after 24 days, what everyone knew when they watched the debate, which is that he had to get out of the race, finally decides it. As it was reported at the time, he calls Kamala Harris, says he's getting out, says he's going to endorse her, and they go on. What actually happened is Biden calls Harris. Harris's team, by the way, is in the pool house next to the pool at the vice president's residence, doing a meeting about what are they going to do if Biden gets out at some point. And they don't think it's going to be immediately, but they're already starting to plot like what they're going to do. Biden calls Harris. He gets on the phone with her, and she says, are you going to endorse me? And he says, you have my support, kid. And, you've been in politics long enough to know when someone doesn't answer the question directly, the answer is, no or maybe. It's certainly not yes. So she's freaking out because the minute he gets out of the race, there's going to be a full-on battle for his delegates, right? You've got all these governors standing on the sidelines thinking about running, whether that's Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker or Phil Murphy out in New Jersey. And so she's like, I got to be able to lock down all these delegates. And in order to do that, I'm going to need your endorsement. And she says, and he says, well, listen, I have a statement. He reads, and she says, are you going to endorse me in the statement? And he says, well, maybe Thursday, and this is on a Sunday, and he's saying I'm gonna do like 3 days, 4 days. I'm gonna like let it play out a little bit, And really what he's doing here, and you talked before, Sean, I think so sharply and intelligently about Biden's ego and putting himself above his party and his own interests. And this is a moment where he thinks he's going to be able to sell the American public on the idea that he is a magnanimous figure like George Washington, voluntarily giving up power, and that he will be celebrated by the American people for this very generous move. And he wants to be able to like do a victory lap for like 3 or 4 days. And Kamala Harris is thinking in her mind, if you get out and you don't endorse me, that's as good as a negative endorsement. You're basically telling people you don't have any faith in me. So they go back and forth on the phone for a while. They get off the phone, and she and her aides get together, and he and his aides get together, and her team puts together a statement for him. They get back on the phone, and finally Biden says, look, all right, I'll put out one statement for me, and then today I will put out, later today I'll put out another statement for you. And she's just thinking like, please let it not be very long between those two things. It ends up being 30 minutes. I'm sure you remember, I'm sure some of the viewers remember that during that 30 minutes, all the talk on cable television was why Joe Biden hadn't endorsed Kamala Harris and if it meant that he wouldn't do that. So she got a little glimpse of that. And the other thing that was going on is Barack Obama's in the wings, trying to set up an open convention, trying to get a mini primary, an open convention, doesn't want Harris. And he's set up a meeting. I'm sure he set up other meetings too, but we know about one he had set up with Jim Clyburn, the South Carolina congressman, for later that day. And Clyburn was like, I need Biden to endorse Harris so I can endorse Harris so that by the time I talk to Obama, he can't cajole me into supporting this open primary. And Clyburn ends up getting on the phone with Obama later in the day and says, look, I've already endorsed Harris. So your whole, open convention thing, I ain't a part of it. And that phone call lasted less than a minute.
Yeah, but Amie, he says to him, according to your book, Clyburn says to Obama, we're not going to skip over the first black woman.
Yeah.
Here's Barack Obama, and I'm blown away when I'm reading these pages. I'm flipping. I'm going, you got to be kidding me. Does he honestly think that there should be an open convention, or is it something with Harris because he really makes her dance for her dinner?
I don't think that the former president thought that she could win, and that's the end of the story. And, he wanted someone who could win. He looked at people like Gretchen Whitmer. He liked Wes Moore. There were other people that spoke to him. And Kamala Harris wasn't one of them.
But then let's get it. I mean, the Wilmington crowd. So she gets, the keys to the car, and Jen O'Malley Dillon and the team up in Wilmington, you're inheriting the Biden team. And I don't get the sense that was a great. So one, they don't mesh together. And then two, she tries to bring some aides in. And the Biden team is like, yeah, I'm not really sure we want you on these calls and in these meetings. And I'm thinking to myself, I would be if I were Team Biden, I'd want to be, very gracious, because I'm thinking I don't want to lose my job because it's not really our guy anymore. But they seem to be kind of cocky about this. Like, we're letting you be the nominee.
Right.
I was shocked at, like, if I were Kamala Harris, I'd say, gosh, I probably should get my own team and whatever. But there was a huge tension, it seems, between the folks in Wilmington. And it was like, she wanted to, I think, change something about the press release you guys write in terms of the header, make it more hers. And they were like, yeah, we're going to keep it Biden Harris for now or something. And I'm like, it was mind blowing to me. They should have, I would have assumed they would have been the ones that said, hey, what can we do to show you that we're now loyal to you? And instead it was sort of like, hey, we'll let you kind of hang out in Wilmington, and her aides are hanging around like some like small little office as opposed to the big conference room, because that's where they've been relegated to. That did not seem like a recipe for success, Amie.
No, I mean, it was not. And I think that, the whole thing, this is why we kind of take you into this, because it was a complete catastrophe, soup to nuts, starting in that moment, building toward, when she does take over and things do go awry. So I think it's one of the revelations. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone looking at this.
I mean, like I said, I was thinking to myself, I was there's one instance where her finance person flies in, and I think it's with Rufus Gifford.
Yeah.
He's sort of like, thanks for coming out here, head back west. And it takes Tony West, her brother-in-law, to basically broker the peace. But I was shocked at the level of cockiness by the Biden team not embracing these guys and saying, hey, here's a home for you. We kind of put name tags out to make sure you felt welcome. Like, that was really not a smart move. I guess, was that they just didn't like her? They didn't think she could win? Because to me, that, again, this is not how you want to start a sprint to the finish.
Yeah. Go on, Jon.
I was just gonna say, I think there are a couple things at work here, Sean. One of them is that this is a truly cocky group of campaign consultants, campaign aides who worked on Biden in 2020. Most of them are Obama veterans. They believe they made Obama president and that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And that attitude is reflected in the way they deal with their colleagues and even the way they dealt with the vice president, which is shocking, to your point. The other thing that's at play here is that Joe Biden, impresses upon Kamala Harris his desire for her to have no daylight with him, and basically is trying to handcuff her so that she is loyal to him rather than loyal to the purpose of winning the presidency. It's like he doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand that the minute he becomes not the candidate, he's supposed to fall in line behind the candidate. And, you've been in politics for long enough. The candidate is the thing, like whether it's on the Republican side or the Democratic side, and everybody needs to, in a campaign and in their party, needs to point toward trying to make that person win. And Joe Biden had a different agenda, which was to protect Joe Biden's legacy at all costs. And I think as a result, Democrats neither won the presidency, nor was Joe Biden's legacy protected.
Amie, they thought they could win, right? Was it just her, or did these top aides actually think she had a shot?
They thought that she could win, and that's pretty much the big bombshell. Once again, I don't want to ruin anything for anyone watching this.
No.
But they go into that night thinking, both of them, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, thinking that they are going to win. And I think the line that is probably the biggest bombshell of this book is that we write that they were gaslit by their own people.
What does that mean?
They were led to believe that they had won, that they were going to.
But did her team believe that, or were they just kind of blowing smoke up their butts?
So, Sean, we report for the first time on the final projection of the campaign, and it was done in a slideshow of the top campaign aides, and it had Trump winning. And at the same time, the top campaign officials are telling Kamala Harris she's going to win, even though their last projection has Trump winning. Now, we know these are close races, but she was so convinced that she was going to win that on election night, she doesn't know what to do with herself, right? I mean, she's shocked. And we take readers into the vice president's residence in the moments where she finds out she's lost, and she can't compute it, right? And she goes to bed that night thinking, I'll use, safe language, goes to bed that night thinking, what the hell happened? I thought, they told me I was going to win. And I didn't win. And so, let's put it this way. If you're into watching the Democratic car crash over and over again in stunning glory, this book is for you. And if you're into watching what Donald Trump did, right, because we haven't talked too much about Trump.
No, I know. I want to get to that.
It's also in this book.
All right, Amie, last question on Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
She had a disastrous 2019 campaign. This one did not go well for her. There's a lot of talk about her running for governor again. Do you think she runs for governor? I know the book ends with the campaign, but do you think that they look at this and say, hey, we should try for a third time? Or have they gotten the message?
That is what's being debated right now. I know that I've spoken to members of her team and close confidants who say that she wants to run for governor, but she wants to also keep her options open. I think they think that she can win. And they also thought that she could win if the race went on longer. That's a belief that they have right now.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.